She screamed at my son over the sound of rubber on asphalt. I stayed silent, because I knew exactly how loud the neighborhood was about to become. I have commanded battalions under artillery fire. I have stood calm while radio screamed casualty reports and the ground trembled beneath armored tracks. But nothing prepares you for the sound of a grown woman screaming at your child. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of silence that only exists in residential neighborhoods that believe they are important. Trimmed hedges, identical houses, flags mounted at identical angles. The illusion of order, the lie of control. My son was riding his bicycle, not fast, not recklessly, just slow loops around the cul-de-sac, the soft hum of tires brushing clean pavement. He was 9, helmet on, knees scraped from childhood, not war. He was laughing, one of those laughs that comes from lungs that don't yet know what fear is. I stood in the driveway, coffee in hand, scanning emails on my phone. Old habits die hard. Even on leave, the mind stays alert. I noticed her before I heard her. She stormed out her house like a missile launched without guidance. Hair pulled tight, jaw clenched, arms already swinging before words formed. I recognized the posture instantly. I'd seen it on officers who wanted power more than responsibility. HEY, she screamed. My son slowed instinctively. Soldiers' kids learn tone before language. Stop that right now. He looked toward me, confused. I nodded once. Calm. Don't escalate. She crossed the street without checking traffic. Finger already pointed. That noise. That constant noise, she shouted. Do you have any idea how annoying that is? I stepped forward, placing myself between her and my son without touching either of them. My voice stayed level. Ma'am, he's riding a bicycle. In the street. In the afternoon. She laughed, sharp and fake. I don't care what he's doing. The sound of those tires is unbearable. This is a quiet neighborhood. I looked around. Birds, wind, distant lawnmower. This is a public road, I said, and he's a child. Her eyes flicked to my son, then back to me, irritated that I hadn't deferred. Well, maybe you should teach him some manners. Or better yet, tell him to ride somewhere else. Some of us work from home. There it was. Ownership without authority. Control without duty. He's fine where he is, I said. Her face hardened. If he keeps riding, I'll call the homeowners association. I almost smiled. Almost. Do what you feel you need to do. I replied. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice like it was a threat. You people always think rules don't apply to you. I met her eyes. I live by rules, I said. More than you realize. She scoffed and turned on her heel, marching back toward her house like she'd won something. My son looked up at me. Dad, did I do something wrong? I knelt beside him, adjusting his helmet strap. No, I said, you did everything right. That should have been the end of it. But people like her never stop at one confrontation. They escalate. They document. They gather imaginary allies. 3 days later, a notice appeared on my door. Formal noise complaint. Excessive disturbance. It cited repeated tire noise, disruption of community peace, and failure to comply with verbal warnings. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. I had spent my career studying escalation patterns. This was textbook. I could have crushed it instantly. A few calls. A few names dropped. A uniform worn once in public. But I didn't. Because sometimes discipline isn't about force. Sometimes it's about timing. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week. I attended. I wore jeans. No insignia. No medals. No hints. She sat across the room, smug, surrounded by nodding heads and whispered validation. When it was my turn to speak, I stood calmly. My son rides a bicycle, I said. If that's a violation, then the rules need revision. She interrupted immediately. This isn't about children. It's about noise pollution. The board nodded. I nodded too. Understood, I said. I'll make sure there's no confusion about noise levels going forward. Her lips curved into a satisfied smile. She thought she'd won. That was her first mistake, because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in 2 weeks, I was hosting an officially sanctioned military morale and recruitment event. And the permits? Already approved. The location? The same street she claimed to control. I went home that night and watched my son ride his bicycle one more time before sunset. Quietly. For now, silence can be a weapon if you know how to use it. In the military, we're taught that the loudest person in the room is usually the least dangerous. Real power doesn't announce itself. It prepares. It documents. It waits until every variable is locked down so tightly that resistance becomes pointless. That week, I said nothing. My son still rode his bicycle, but only in the evenings and only briefly. Not because I was afraid of her, but because I wanted the record to show restraint. I wanted patience logged in invisible ink. Meanwhile, the complaints multiplied. Emails from the HOA began landing in my inbox with mechanical regularity. Each one cited a different rule, a different subsection, a different interpretation. Tire noise, repetitive motion, pattern disturbance. I hadn't heard that term outside intelligence briefings. She was busy. I could tell she was a type who enjoyed paperwork the way some people enjoy wine, smugly and without understanding its limits. One afternoon, as I was returning from a run, she caught me near the mailbox. "I hope you're taking this seriously," she said, waving a folder thick with papers. "I always do," I replied. She stepped closer, lowering her voice again. I spoke the board. "They agree with me. You're on thin ice." I met her gaze and offered a polite smile. Good to know. That confused her. People like her need confrontation to feel relevant. Calm unnerves them. She huffed and walked away, heels clicking like punctuation marks. That evening, after my son went to bed, I spread my own documents across the dining table. Permits, authorizations, safety waivers, traffic control approvals, noise exemptions. Everything was legal. Everything was signed. Everything was irreversible. The event wasn't some reckless stunt. It was a sanctioned morale exhibition, vehicle demonstrations, precision driving recruitment outreach, controlled drifting exercises by certified operators on closed residential streets, coordinated with local authorities. The irony wasn't lost on me. She hated the sound of bicycle tires. I wondered how she'd feel about armored engines revving in perfect discipline. But still I waited because timing matters. The HOA scheduled a compliance inspection of my property the following Friday. 2 board members arrived, clipboards in hand, expressions carefully neutral. Karen stood across the street pretending to water her lawn while listening to every word. They cited my son's bicycle again, suggested restrictions, time windows, community harmony. I listened. I nodded. I thanked them for their diligence. Then I asked one question. Are there any restrictions on permitted events conducted by external authorities? They exchanged glances. Well, one said slowly, that would fall outside HOA jurisdiction. I nodded again. Thank you for clarifying. Karen stopped watering her lawn. Her eyes narrowed. The inspection ended shortly after. That night, my son asked me why the lady didn't like his bike. I chose my words carefully. Some people confuse quiet with control, I said. They think silence belongs to them. He thought about that, then nodded. Is my bike too loud? I smiled. No, I said, it's just honest. The week before the event, notices went up around the neighborhood. Temporary road closure, authorized activity, logos, seals, official language, doors opened, curtains shifted. Karen was at my driveway within an hour. What is this? She demanded, waving the notice. Information, I said calmly. You can't just shut down the street. It's already approved. For what? I paused. An event. She laughed, sharp again, but there was uncertainty underneath. This is harassment. I'll have this stopped. Feel free to try. She did. She called the HOA, the city, the police non-emergency line. She sent emails marked urgent and immediate action required. Every response pointed her the same way. Authorized. Approved. Out of HOA scope, her certainty began to crack. The night before the event, she confronted me one last time. "I know what you're doing," she hissed. "This is retaliation." I shook my head. "No," I said, "this is scheduling." She stared at me, searching for leverage, for fear, for anger. She found none. "You think you're important," she snapped. I leaned in slightly, voice still even. "No," I said, "I think preparation is important." She left without another word. At dawn, the street transformed. Barricades, cones, personnel in reflective vests, engines arriving on transport trailers, silent for now, but heavy with promise. Neighbors gathered. Phones came out. Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, face pale. She still didn't know who I was. She only knew she was losing control. And the engines hadn't even started yet. She wanted silence. She got engines. And she still had no idea who approved every single one of them. There's a moment before any operation begins when the air changes. It's subtle. Civilians don't notice it. But anyone who has stood on a tarmac before deployment or beside a convoy seconds before movement knows it instantly. The silence isn't calm, it's loaded. Every sound carries weight. Every pause means something. That was the air in the neighborhood that morning. The sun was barely above the rooftops when the first transport rolled in, not loud yet, just present. Heavy tires compressing asphalt that had never carried more than delivery vans and sedans. The street, her street, absorbed the weight without complaint. Personnel moved with quiet efficiency. No shouting, no confusion. Clipboards checked, radios tested, barriers adjusted by inches, not feet. Precision unnerves people who rely on chaos. Karen stood on her porch, coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips. She wore disbelief like armor, but it didn't fit properly. Her eyes moved constantly, from the vehicles, to the personnel, to the crowd forming at the ends of the street. Neighbors gathered in clusters, murmuring, filming, speculating. "What's going on? Is this a movie? Did you know about this?" I stood near the command table, baseball cap low, jacket zipped. To anyone else, I was just another organizer, another faceless authority. That anonymity was intentional. Karen crossed the street with purpose, heels striking pavement like accusations. "You!" she snapped, pointing at a uniform coordinator. "Who approved this?" He didn't even look up from his checklist. "Command," he said. "Well, I want to speak to them." He finally glanced at her, expression neutral. "They're busy." She turned, scanning faces until her eyes locked onto me. Of course they did. She marched over. "This is completely unacceptable," she said. "You did this on purpose." I looked at her calmly. "Did what?" "You know exactly what you did," she said. "You're turning my neighborhood into a racetrack." I gestured around us. "Actually," I said, "it's a controlled demonstration area. Temporary." She laughed again, but it cracked halfway through. "You think slapping a few cones down makes us okay?" "No," I said. "The permits do." Her mouth opened, then closed. "I want to see them." I nodded once and handed her a laminated copy from the folder. She scanned it quickly at first, then slower. Her eyes moved back and forth as unfamiliar language confronted her confidence. City authorization, police coordination, noise exemption clauses, military liaison signatures. Her grip tightened. This can't be right." "It is." She looked up at me, suspicion finally sharpening into something closer to fear. "Who are you?" I didn't answer, because right then, the first engine turned over. Not a roar, not yet. A deep, controlled rumble that rolled through the street like distant thunder. Windows vibrated. Birds scattered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Karen flinched. The sound wasn't chaotic. That's what unsettled her most. It wasn't reckless noise. It was disciplined power, restrained by protocol. She backed up a step. "This violates HOA noise regulations," she said weakly. I met her eyes. "The HOA has no jurisdiction today." Her voice rose. "I will call the police." I nodded toward the officers already stationed at the barricades. They're here. Her face flushed. You're enjoying this. No, I said honestly. I'm executing a plan. That was when the first demonstration began. The vehicle moved into position, engine revving higher now, control bursts echoing off identical houses. Tires squealed. Not wild, not random, but precise arcs carved into asphalt under expert hands. The sound was immense. And legal. People cheered. Phones recorded. Kids stared wide-eyed. My son stood beside me, helmet still under his arm, eyes shining. Dad, he whispered, this is loud. I smiled slightly. Yes, I said, it is. Karen stood frozen. Every complaint she'd ever filed had been about control, about her belief that comfort gave her authority. And now, authority stood in front of her, structured, documented, undeniable. She rounded on me again. You planned this because of me. I finally leaned in, lowering my voice, not threatening, just clear. No, I said, I planned this because it was already scheduled. You just happened to test the boundaries before it happened. Her eyes searched my face again. You're not just some resident. No. What do you do? I straightened slightly. I serve. That was all I said. But it was enough. Something shifted in her posture. People like her understand hierarchy instinctively, even if they pretend not to. She swallowed. The engines roared again, louder this time, synchronized movements, sending shock waves through the street she once claimed ownership over. And for the first time since I'd met her, Karen said nothing at all. Power reveals itself in strange ways. Sometimes arrives with applause and spectacle. Other times, it settles into a room quietly, changing the temperature without anyone realizing why. That morning, as engines thundered and rubber met asphalt in disciplined arcs, Karen experienced neither. What she felt instead was displacement, the sensation of realizing you were never in control to begin with. She stood at the edge of the crowd, arms folded so tightly it looked like she was holding herself together. Every cheer from the neighbors felt like an insult to her authority. Every rev of an engine was a reminder that the world did not, in fact, revolve around her comfort. I watched the way I'd watched hostile village elders in foreign provinces, carefully, without judgment. People who mistake proximity for power behave the same everywhere. The demonstration continued with clockwork precision. Vehicles rotated in and out. Operators switched roles. Safety officers moved like shadows, always present, never intrusive. The sound rose and fell in control waves, never crossing legal thresholds, never slipping into chaos. That detail mattered, because chaos gives people like her something to cling to. Order leaves them naked. She tried again. I saw her speaking rapidly into her phone, pacing near the sidewalk. Her free hand chopped the air as if volume might replace authority. Whatever response she received clearly wasn't the one she wanted. Her shoulders sagged slightly. Then she did what all failing bullies do. She escalated publicly. She pushed through the crowd toward the temporary command table, voice raised, eyes wild. "This is unsafe," she shouted. "Children live here." A few heads turned. Some parents stiffened. Safety concerns always land heavier. I stepped forward before anyone else could speak. Safety briefing was conducted at 0700. I said calmly, "Barricades exceed required distance. Medical personnel are on standby. Law enforcement is present. This is safer than most intersections during rush hour." She stared at me. "You can't possibly guarantee that." I gestured gently toward my son, who stood behind the barrier with other kids, supervised, smiling. "I can," I said. "That's my job." The word job lingered. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Wait, what does he do?" Karen heard it too. Her voice dropped an octave. "Who exactly are you reporting to?" I finally exhaled. "Today?" I said, "The Regional Command Authority." Her mouth went dry. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." She shook her head, backing away slightly as if distance might protect her. You can't just shut down streets and bring military vehicles into civilian neighborhoods." I met her eyes, steady and unblinking. "Yes," I said, "we can, when it's authorized." The crowd was fully engaged now. Phones were no longer pointed just at the vehicles. They were pointed at her. She realized it. The shift from protagonist to spectacle is devastating when you don't see it coming. "I will be filing a formal complaint," she announced loudly, voice trembling just enough to betray her. I nodded. "You should," I said. "Documentation is important." That sentence hit her harder than any insult could have, because suddenly, documentation wasn't her weapon anymore. It was mine. She stormed back toward her house, retreating behind her door like a general abandoning a lost position. The event continued. By midday, the neighborhood had transformed from a grid of identical houses into something alive. Food trucks arrived. Recruitment booths opened. Kids climbed into static displays under supervision. Veterans exchanged quiet nods that needed no explanation. And through it all, the sound continued, controlled, legal, undeniable. I caught glimpses of Karen through her window curtains, watching, calculating, rewriting the story in her head where she was still the victim. But reality doesn't bend to rewritten narratives. Late afternoon, as the final demonstration wrapped up and engines powered down, a black SUV pulled up near her house. She stepped outside just as two uniformed officials approached her door. Not aggressively, not dramatically, formally. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know its shape. Complaints had been reviewed, false reports noted, abuse of HOA authority documented, interference with authorized personnel flagged. Patterns matter. She argued at first, pointed, raised her voice. Then one of the officials handed her a folder. Her voice stopped. Paper beats volume every time. She glanced toward me once. Just once. For the first time, there was no anger in her eyes, only understanding. That evening, as the street reopened and barricades came down, my son rode his bicycle again. Slowly, casually, free. Karen stayed inside. She never filed another complaint. There's a kind of silence that comes after power moves through a place. It isn't peace, not immediately. It's more like the hush that settles after a storm has passed, but before anyone steps outside to assess the damage. People listen differently. They measure their words. They recalibrate their sense of importance. That was the neighborhood the morning after. No engines, no barricades, no uniforms, just houses again, streets again, the illusion restored, but thinner now. Like a coat of paint over a crack everyone pretends not to see. I stood in my driveway, coffee in hand, watching the sun climb over the rooftops. My son wheeled his bicycle out beside me, careful, instinctively quiet. Old habits. Children adapt faster than adults. "Can I ride?" he asked. I looked down at him. "Yes," I said. "Anywhere you want." He pushed off, tires humming softly against the pavement. The same sound that had triggered weeks of outrage. The same sound that now passed without comment. No doors flew open. No shouting followed. No authority challenged it. Karen's house remained closed. Curtains drawn. Driveway empty. She didn't emerge that day. Or the next. People like her don't disappear. They regroup. They tell themselves new stories where they were wronged, misunderstood, targeted. Accountability feels like persecution when you've never faced it before. A few days later, the HOA sent a final email. It was brief, careful, legal. All previous notices regarding bicycle-related disturbances have been rescinded. The association regrets any inconvenience caused. No apology, just retreat. That was fine. Apologies are words. Behavior is truth. I saw Karen again a week later. She was checking her mail, movement subdued, posture smaller than I remembered. She sensed me before she saw me. People always do when their certainty has been stripped away. She turned. We locked eyes. For a moment, I expected anger, or bitterness, or some last attempt to reclaim dignity through defiance. Instead, she looked tired. "You didn't have to do all that," she said quietly. I considered my answer carefully. "Yes," I said, "I did." She frowned. "All of it? The noise? The event? That wasn't for you," I said. "That was already planned." She hesitated. then asked the question she should have asked at the beginning. What do you do? I studied her face. There was no challenge in it now, just curiosity mixed with regret. I'm an Army general, I said simply. The words landed with weight, but not drama. Her breath caught. Oh. That single syllable carried weeks of realization. Every assumption she'd made, every line she'd crossed, every time she'd mistaken volume for power. I didn't know, she said. I nodded. That's usually how it goes. She looked down at the mail in her hands. I was just trying to keep things quiet. I softened my tone, not for her, but because leadership doesn't need cruelty. Quiet isn't the same as order, I said, and control isn't the same as responsibility. She nodded slowly, absorbing it. I crossed a line, she admitted. Yes, I said. You did. She waited, maybe for forgiveness, maybe for reassurance. I offered neither, because closure doesn't always come with comfort. She turned and walked back toward her house, shoulders slightly hunched, no longer the self-appointed guardian of the street. That afternoon, my son came home flushed and smiling. She didn't yell today, he said. I smiled back. No, I said, she won't. Weeks passed. Life returned to routine. School runs, morning jogs, evening bike rides. The neighborhood remained quieter, not because of rules, but because people had learned something without being told. They had seen real authority up close. Not angry, not petty, not loud, just prepared. One evening, my son rode up beside me as I locked the front door. Dad, he said. Yes. Why didn't you tell her who you were in the beginning? I crouched to his level. Because respect that comes from fear doesn't last, I said. And respect that comes from titles isn't real. He thought about that. So when is it okay to be loud? I smiled. When you've earned the right, I said. And when you're protecting something that matters. He nodded, satisfied, and pedaled off again, tires whispering against the road. The sound didn't bother anyone anymore. And that, more than engines or authority or paperwork, was the real victory. Because the loudest lesson wasn't taught with noise at all. It was taught with restraint.